Welcome, everyone, to Parkside at Home. My name is Callie.
And I'm Matt, and if it's your first time with us, welcome. We would love to just say, hey, and one of the ways that we can do that is through our connection cards at parkside.life/connect. That's a way for us to, first off, know that you're watching, to get to know you a little bit, and so that we can dive a little bit deeper into this whole thing that we call community, because that's what we're all about.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that we hope you know about Parkside Church is that we care about you, and we want to help you and support you and encourage you in any way that we can. And one of the things that we do as a church is something called Rooted. Rooted is a 10-week discipleship intensive that hopefully helps you create and establish healthy spiritual rhythms in your life and allows you to just learn more about God and learn more about community and the ways that God is moving in your life.
Yeah, so like Callie said, it's 10 weeks, and we talk about all things discipleship related to really help you figure out what are those foundations of the Christian life that we are being called by God to lean into and to live into. So that's starting on September 11th, coming up here pretty quick. If you head over to parkside.life/rooted, you can sign up and find more information.
August is sadly winding down. I love the summer, but the fall time is a really great time. And we have a lot going on here at Parkside when it comes to September. And one of the things that we want to let you know about and mark on your calendar is our annual block party. This is going to be Saturday, September 24th. It is so much fun. We had a blast last year. And it's actually the Saturday right before our birthday. So it's going to be a weekend packed full of very fun things and a lot of celebrating and just celebrating what God has done through our church.
Yeah, ton of fun. If you've not been a part of it before, definitely come check it out. It is, like Callie said, it's just a blast. Additionally, if you want to join us by helping out and, serve in some way or help us serve some food or be part of the games, whatever it is, we would love that. So go over to parkside.life/serve, and again, you can find more information.
As we head into the message, I just want to remind you guys that we are so very thankful of your generosity. It's because of your generosity through serving and giving that we are able to do things like the block party. So thank you so much.
Yeah, so if you are prepared to give, you can do that, again, online, safely and securely at parkside.life/give. Follow the instructions. And again, thank you.
We will see you later. Thanks so much.
Well, so excited to be with you guys today. It's the last Sunday in August, which just sounds really strange. Like summer is coming to a close and we're starting fall. But September is a really big deal for us around Parkside Church. It's always a really fun, busy season. We talked about the block party that's on the 24th, which was so much fun last year. Kind of the biggest event we had done to that point as far as like just number of people, but then it was just a ton of fun. And so I encourage you to save the date for that, and like we need your help. We need you to serve and hang out and just love on families in our community. It's a great way to continue to let people know that we're here, just like we exist, but also that we're here for them and we want to serve them and love them. So please go check that out. Go ahead and sign up. If not, we're just going to come ask you anyway. So you might as well let's cut out the middleman. Let's make it happen. It's going to be a ton of fun. But a thing that we're doing differently this year is that's taking place the same weekend as birthday weekend, which I can't believe we're already talking about birthday weekend, which if you're newer to Parkside, like that's the weekend that we celebrate Parkside's birthday, which this is our second birthday, which we have a toddler, guys. Like, isn't that amazing? So we're really excited. And look, we celebrate big that week. It's going to be a lot of fun. So make sure you go ahead. And September 25th, it's the last Sunday of September. We're going to celebrate our birthday. And you can't celebrate birthday without ice cream. Okay, I can leave cake behind, but not ice cream. So we should have ice cream that day. I'm just waiting on confirmation for that. I promised it like 2 weeks ago. So we're either going to have Claire's or we're going to have something. But I am praying for Claire's because that is ice cream that Jesus would make if he made ice cream. Okay. It's also the week that we start our Bridge Builders series, where we talk about the things that are most important to us as a church. And we've begun working on those messages and what we're going to communicate. And I'm telling you, I could not be more excited to preach those messages. In fact, I'm having to work really hard not to preach them like now. Like I find myself like wanting to talk about it now, but we're going to wait. It's going to be awesome. But between now and then, we're going to talk about holiness. And everybody said amen. I'm really excited about this. It's not something we talk about a lot in church anymore in settings because it seems so big and it seems so daunting. It's easier for us to stay away from it. And if you were here several weeks ago, I think it was the week of July 4th when we did a partnership with Vintage Church, a sister church in North Carolina, and New Covenant Church, another sister church in North Carolina. We talked about this idea of the things that we don't talk about as much anymore because we're worried about scaring people away from faith. But one of the things that we're committed to here at Parkside Church is truth, and even the hard truth. But the good news is that talking about things like holiness, like it's not as scary as we tend to think it is. And over the last few weeks, as I've been beginning to process like what this conversation was going to be, I spent some time reflecting over my own journey with the idea of holiness and when it kind of became known to me in my mind. And I'm naturally thinking about people who have influenced my life. And obviously with the passing of Deborah's father over the last couple weeks, I've thought about Ben, Pap, quite a bit. But I've also kind of thought about other people in my life who have influenced me. And you guys have heard me talk about my youth pastor, Gary, quite a bit. He's a spiritual dad to me. He's been a physical father to me. And like the saddest thing about our relationship is that he lives all the way in Kansas now. And I just don't get to see him as much as I would like to, but he's still someone that means an awful lot to me. And when I was young in my faith, like 13, 14, like just trying to figure out like Jesus in general, he was a great sounding board as I began to like figure out what I would later come to understand as theology and doctrine. Like I didn't know those words when I was 13, 14-year-olds, but I understand them a little bit better now. Not great, but we're still working on that. But he helped me kind of suss those things out in my life. And I remember this one particular conversation that we had in his office just like 2 miles up the street at my home church. And we began to kind of like parse out like what is holiness. And we didn't use that word because like I said, I didn't know what it meant. But now I understand that I was making a connection. And I remember at that season of my life, like even at a young age, I completely and utterly had messed up in a lot of different areas of my life. Like sin had gripped my soul even at 14 years old. And I'm not going to tell you what those things are because you would probably never come back. And like it's still a pretty vulnerable spot for me because those things still have impact on my life today. Decisions that I made at 13, 14, 15 years old. But I remember feeling defeated and upset about those things, but also feeling the pressure of hearing things like this in settings like this. Be holy as I am holy. Be perfect as I am perfect. And there's this connection between holiness and perfection in theology and doctrine that layers these things together where they're almost synonymous. And it confused me. It even made me frustrated at times. And this is the question that I asked Gary, my youth pastor, sitting in his office probably one day that I'd probably skipped school at some point. Annabeth, you didn't hear that. I got to remember that Annabeth is now in here, and it's going to influence the things that I say. So I was sitting across from him and feeling frustrated about where my life was. And there was a mathematical certainty that I had made a mistake that week that was pretty big and reconciling this idea of perfection or holiness. And I asked him, if I know that I can't achieve perfection, if I've already messed it up, what's the point in even trying? Why in the world would I pursue something that I know is utterly unattainable because I've already messed up? What's the point in trying? And as I was trying to figure out like the worthiness of that endeavor, Gary said something to me that has begun to shape my idea of what perfection or holiness is. And it still means a lot to me as someone who turned 40 years old this week. Happy birthday to me. I didn't get Claire's this week. I need to fix that today. Gary said something to me that shaped my idea of what I now know as holiness. He said, God doesn't expect you to be perfect. He expects you to try. I mean, that's not overly complicated. That's not even that profound, but for a 14-year-old who was struggling so much to reconcile the mistakes that he had already made with this idea of pursuing God and doing my best to do everything I could the right way, this was a really great starting place. Because I think for a lot of us, the idea and the concept of holiness is something that seems unattainable. Because you know that you've messed up. I mean, should we raise hands? Like, who in here has lived a holy life that's never made a mistake? Nobody. Like, we've all messed up, so it seems unattainable. And I know I'm not the only one who has wrestled with the worthiness of attempting something that seems like you cannot accomplish. Most of you guys know this about me, and if you don't, surprise, I'm a huge football fan. I love football. In fact, these last few weeks have been exciting for me because I've missed football so much that I get excited about preseason games. So like yesterday, I spent a lot of time like working in my yard. I got stung by a wasp. I could not remember the last time I got stung by a bee. Like, it was crazy, but it's okay because I lived for getting all that stuff done and be able to sit on my bed and do some work and watch football. I watched the first half of the Cincinnati Rams game, could care less. It was football. I was excited. But my Colts played last night, and they never win preseason games, and they won a preseason game against Tom Brady, and that makes my heart happy. I love football, and the Colts, that's my team. Like, those are my boys. I could tell you all kind of stuff about the Colts and their history. I even have a Peyton Manning tattoo. That's a joke. Or is it? This week, our punter, one of the most important people on the team, he ruptured his Achilles punting balls. And I don't know how that happens, but it sounds incredibly painful. But he ruptured his Achilles. He's out for the season. Can't play all season long, which is super sad. But you know what I didn't do when I heard that? I didn't go to my front yard and practice punting balls so I could go out and do a tryout for the Indianapolis Colts because they needed a punter. I didn't do that because there's no chance whatsoever that I would ever make the team. Like, they would, if I drove up to their facility on 56th Street, downtown Indy, like, they would laugh me all the way back to Greenville because it's like, who do you think you are? Like, because, like, we don't try to do things that we know that we can't do, like that are just utterly unattainable and this seem ridiculous. Although it would have made a fantastic story. Like, local pastor from small town South Carolina makes the Colts, and like we win the Super Bowl, and when they did the movie of that, Michael B. Jordan could play Matt Rhodes, and I think that'd be great. I think it'd be awesome. Typically speaking, we don't see the point in striving for something that seems impossible to reach. But God calls us all throughout Scripture to live a holy life. So if He's calling us to do it, it's not unattainable. The problem is answering the question, how do we get there? Like, if we can live a life that is holy and pleasing to God, there's got to be a way to do it. And I think it starts with dissecting and setting aside the misconceptions that we have about what holiness really is. So let's start there together. I think practically speaking, like, if we're honest, most of us, including myself, when we think about holiness, like, where our mind typically defaults is to a set or list of rules that we're supposed to follow. Hey, how do you live a holy life? And I was like, if I do all the things that I'm supposed to, if I avoid wrong and just live right, that is what holiness looks like. But that is called legalism. When we live our life based simply on a set of rules and stressing obedience apart from faith, that's legalism. And legalism is something that has hurt the church for generations and generations. We talked about this a few weeks ago when we talked about following the letter of the law instead of understanding the spirit of the law. That the reason that we do what the law says is because we understand what God is saying behind it. And it's about honoring Him, not just doing what we're told. And for someone who really values freedom and some measure of influence over the way that my life is, I really love that God doesn't want me to do the things that He asked me to do in the Bible out of simple and just obedience, but because we understand that honoring God is what really matters. It means a lot. Jesus is pretty incredible. I think we all know that. And one of the things He was incredible at is crafting language that's inspiring, it's beautiful, and it's challenging. But sometimes, like Jesus, when He talks, man, it cuts straight to the bone. And the scripture I want to start out with, this is one of those moments where he's speaking about the legalism of the religious, and he is not playing. So if you turn with me to Matthew chapter 22, we're going to start in verse 23. So 23, sorry, not 22. And we're going to look at these times, one of these times where Jesus is speaking directly to the religious leaders at the time, the Pharisees, and he is not messing around. Starting with verse 23, he says, "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees." You guys realize, like, if Jesus, like we're living in 2022, like he was living there, like he would be speaking to us, like to believers, right? "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You give a tenth of your spices, your mint, your dill, and your cumin, but you have neglected the more important matters of law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. You should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former. You blind guides. You strain out a gnat, but swallow a camel." That's a great illustration. "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You clean the outside of the cup and dish, but the inside are full of greed and self-indulgence. Blind Pharisee! First clean the inside of the cup and the dish, and then the outside will also be clean. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You were like whitewashed tombs. You look beautiful on the outside, but the inside are full of bones of the dead and everything unclean." Just real quick, let's take a step back 7 days to the message that Matt Gumbert gave. When we talked about parsing out and like digging in and understanding the Word of God. One of the things we talked about was repetition. How many times just in these verses does Jesus say, "Woe to you, you teachers of the law, you hypocrites"? And one of the reasons we look at repetition is because it's emphasis. Jesus is trying to drive home a point here. It's as if he's saying, guys, pay attention. You're missing the point. When I'm talking about the things that we're supposed to do to live this life, it's not about doing the right things. It's about being with me. So many times we focus on the doing and we don't just be with God. To me, he was verbally flipping tables. And he was really frustrated. What are you doing here, guys? You're missing the point. And one point I don't want you to miss is that obedience and faith, they are tied together. They do work in conjunction. Like you can't take one without the other. That holy living is supposed to be these things working together. Faith without obedience doesn't lead to the life change that it's meant to. Faith apart from obedience just means we just do what we want to and we're okay with it. There are things about our life that move us to change. But these things work together. Faith and obedience, understanding the law and the spirit of the law and how they work together. So what is holiness? Like if we understand that it's not legalism, that it's not just doing the things that we're called to do simply to do them. Okay, if that's not what it is, then what is it? In 2 Timothy chapter 2, we get a really good idea. "Now in a great house there are not only vessels of gold and silver," not my house, "but also of wood and clay." That's more like my house. "Some for honorable use, some for dishonorable. Therefore, if anyone cleanses himself from what is dishonorable, he will be a vessel for honorable use, set apart as holy, useful to the master for the house, ready for every good work." The vessel will be honorable for honorable use, set apart as holy, useful to the master of the house, ready for every good work. Holiness is being set apart. Simply put, like holiness is being set apart by God, for God. It's not a list of rules. It's not a religious dogma. It's an understanding of the correlation between who God is and who we're supposed to be, and the fact that he loves us and he cares about us. He has a plan for our lives where he takes us and says, "You're mine. I've got a purpose for you. I've got something for you. You are useful for me for every good work." But again, there's a misconception about what this looks like that has played out in the church for years and years and years. And it gives us this distorted idea of what being set apart really means. When we equated holy living with legalism, what we thought set apart meant is separating. Set apart and separated are not the same thing. We've misinterpreted biblical principles like be in the world but not of the world and turned it into reasons to disengage from the world. I mean, you guys have been in church longer than 5 minutes. Like, you've heard this concept, right? Like, as believers, we're supposed to be in the world but not of the world. But in practical reality, we've only kind of lived out one part of that we've taken it and said, like, oh, I need, if I'm not going to be of the world, that means I need to be out of the world. They need to do their thing, and I can't be anywhere close to it. And that's a misconception of what holy living looks like. Yes, being a disciple means that things look different for us. I make decisions in my life based on my faith that make me look different than the rest of them. I include things in my life that some people don't include. I exclude things in my life because of my faith in Jesus. Yes, absolutely. Things look different. They should look different. But being set apart was never meant that Jesus was going to pluck us up from wherever we were the minute we accepted him and set us over here and put us in heaven's waiting room. Right? Your existence now that you've accepted Christ isn't just waiting for Jesus to come back and take you through death or through the second coming. And sometimes as believers, we just like, okay, I accepted Christ. Okay, now I'm just going to go over here and just wait. And the world's going to do its thing, and I'm not going to engage in it. That's them, this is me, and I'm just waiting for Jesus to come back. That's not what that biblical principle means. The reason why our lives look different than the rest of the world is, number one, to honor God. And that's really where we're going, right? That's the reason we make these decisions to live a holy life, is to honor God. But the other part is we have to give people a reason to follow us. If we say that loving Jesus and having a relationship with him is the ultimate pinnacle of human existence, that's really what we're saying. We have to look different so it creates curiosity for people to say, well, like, what's the point? If we say we love Jesus and live like nothing changes, then people are like, then what's the point? I'll just do what I'm doing. But when we understand that transformation creates curiosity, then it draws people to him. When we say things like be in the world but not of the world, we have to live out the entire thought. We have to be in the world. We have to engage with people in our lives, even the people that we disagree with on every issue, even the people that drive us crazy. In fact, I do a better job of dealing with people that I disagree with than the people that just drive me crazy. But as a follower of Jesus Christ, as a disciple, and this has nothing to do with me being a pastor, right? This is not a pastor thing. This is a people who love Jesus thing, right? We have to engage with the world. And if that's the misconception that we have to continue to fight against, maybe it's time to ask a different question. Maybe the question is, what if holiness isn't a destination, but it's a pursuit? I think for me, like when I started to ask that question to Gary when I was young, like I started treating the idea and concept, the doctrine of holiness, like it was a destination. Like at some point, I will figure some things out and I will cross the line and then I will be living a holy life. And in my mind, a holy life was a sinless life. I would never commit a sin again. And saying that even out loud, I realize how preposterous that is. Now, I do think there's a place that we can get to where we don't have to sin anymore, where the new nature that we get from Jesus because of our relationship with him, that we aren't compelled, we don't have to sin, that we know and live in the power that we have to choose to do right over wrong. But it's not a destination. It's a pursuit. To me, it's the more mature version of what Gary said to me, that God doesn't expect me to be perfect, but he expects me to try. After 25 years, over 25 years ago, we had that conversation. Like I said, just a couple miles away from here. I think that's the question. I think that's the answer to the question I asked, the more mature version of it. I was so focused on arrival and achievement, and it was coming from the right place, but it was absolutely the wrong approach. Jesus says in Matthew 5, like, be perfect as I am perfect. And I think I have a better understanding of that now, that it's not about attaining or gaining perfection. It's more about being. It's more about being with Jesus. It's not doing, it's being. So then here's the next question that comes. Like if it's a pursuit and not a destination, what evidence is there when we live our lives in pursuit of holiness? Like how will we know that we're pursuing holiness? Before we answer that question, I want to take a quick second and just remind you that this is a question of self-reflection and self-evaluation. This is not a tool or a lens that we use to judge other people. That's where we can get tripped up really easily, is say, oh, like, how do we know that someone else is pursuing holiness? Like, someone else pursuing holiness is not your responsibility. It's yours, and yours alone. And if that's where your mind went, then you need to go back and read what we read in Matthew chapter 23 about Jesus talking to the Pharisees. You need to read that again and like maybe point it at yourself. And then you need to lean a little bit harder in where we're going. I'm not trying to be mean, but I know this is something I've struggled with, that I've been able to turn that laser focus at someone else, and that's not okay. So how do we know that we're pursuing holiness? If you are pursuing holiness, a fully surrendered life will be the evidence. Jesus speaks to this issue in a really short verse, but incredibly critical. In fact, it could be argued that this is some of the most important words that Jesus ever said. And some of my favorite passage in Matthew chapter 22. So starting with verse 37, it says, Jesus replied, love the Lord God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. The reason why this is one of my favorite passages is because like Jesus gives you the answer to like all the questions, and he tells you how important it is. This is the first and greatest commandment. It's the most basic principle of discipleship, but it's often the root of most our spiritual difficulties. When we get out of sync with this verse, love the Lord God with all your heart, with all your soul, and all your mind. Pursuing holiness means there's no part of your life that's off limits to God. Speaking of self-reflection and self-evaluation, like let's take a moment. Reflect on your life. Like, is there any corner of your life where God does not have influence, where God is not in control, that is off limits to the Father? I mean, that's what we're talking about. That's the first and the most important step in pursuing holiness is like, God, like I'm laid wide open. You know it all. You can see it all, but now you can have control over it all. A fully surrendered life. It's making an active choice at every moment to choose God's way above our way, even when we don't agree with it. This is a notion that I've been keenly aware over the last 3 or 4 weeks as I process the passing of my father-in-law. That's something that Jesus and I have talked a lot about. Like, Jesus, I don't understand this and I don't agree with it, but I trust you. Like, how do I take that truth and apply it to every corner of my life? Every aspect of who I am is like, Jesus, I trust you, even when I don't understand why you're doing what you're doing, why you're asking me to do certain things or be a certain way or whatever, and especially when I don't agree with it, because I understand that your ways are better than my ways. Your ways are higher than my ways. Again, this is not about following a set of laws. It's about surrender to the Father. Paul put it like this in Galatians. For through the law I died to the law so I might live for God. I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The life I now live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. He said, I don't live by the law. I live in the body, the life that I now live, I live by faith. It's not about doing, it's about being. The life we lead is in response to Christ's grace to us, and our obedience to the law is a manifestation of our desire to honor him. I think the best way that I can illustrate this from my own life is making this turn in my own faith. That when I first intersected faith, like to be honest with you, when I accepted Jesus, it was fire insurance. The notion of hell scared me to death, and like, I don't want to do that. Like, because they talked about how it's a lake of fire, and if I can think of two ways that I absolutely do not want to leave this world, it's drowning and burning to death, and this is both. It scared me. And it was like, well, I will follow you, Jesus, because I don't want to do that. And whatever you got sounds a lot better than that. That's where it started. And I think for a lot of people have that story, especially when you're traumatized as a child, right? When you go to church, you're like, if you don't love Jesus, you're going to hell. It's like, that's scary. But then over time, my efforts not to sin, my efforts to do the right thing, to live the right way, started to move out of a response to God's movement in my life. And my desires and effort not to sin were based on honoring Him, not fear of the consequences. To me, that's what pursuit of holiness looks like. So let's ask the hard question. Is your life fully surrendered? Is your life fully surrendered? Is there a place that Jesus can't go? Do you allow Him to have input and influence and even control in things like finances, who you date, who you married, the health of your marriage, the direction of your career, what you watch, the words that you say? Like, is there any part of your life that you're like, nope, this is mine, Lord? You can have everything else. You can have my Sundays. I'll go to small group. I'll do a venture every now and then. Like, you can have all that, but this is mine. That's not a fully surrendered life. He doesn't want to control you. He's not interested in you being a subservient robot disciple. That is not what we're after here. He understands, and I'm beginning to understand, that the greatest freedom that we can have is found in surrender. It sounds so counterintuitive. But when I choose to live God's way, I don't have to worry about things. I don't have to worry about negative consequences of sin. I can find freedom in having blessed relationships. Not that there's never trouble, but like, look, my marriage is in a good place because there's freedom in our relationship, because there's trust, because my wife knows that I don't have a wandering eye. So we can trust one another and find freedom in things like that. Because He loves you, because He gets you, because He knows what's best for you. That's why we can find freedom in surrender. Here's a second evidence. If you're pursuing holiness, selfless living will be the evidence. Oh, this one is sticky, tricky. That's kind of like roasty toasty, but that's a whole separate thing. Living a selfless life will be the evidence. Right after Jesus told us about the first and greatest commandment, He followed up with a principle of selfless living and then gave it equal weight. He said, this is the first and greatest commandment. And then He says this in Matthew chapter 22, verse 9. And the second is like it. The second greatest commandment, love your neighbor as yourself. And what that essentially means is live selflessly. It's not about you. Jesus is reminding us that one of the defining characteristics of a disciple is selflessness. This is hard. This is hard because it goes against our very nature as human beings. When the chips are down, most people will do what's best for them. And it's not always, sometimes it is, but it's not usually out of arrogance or self-absorption. It's about self-protection. Selflessness has always been hard because our human nature always bends towards self-preservation and self-promotion. And this culture that we're living in is making it even more difficult to be selfless. And the reason why I said it's sticky, tricky, because that's my new word. I'm going to put it on a t-shirt. It's going to be great. Maybe not. The reason why it's so complicated is because this world, it puts a facade around selfishness and they call it self-care. Now, look, let me just pause for a quick second. Let me just tell you a little bit about just my story and where I am with all that. Back in 2019, at the beginning of 2019, I had a health crisis. I found out I had a congenital heart defect. I spent a week in the hospital, had 2 heart procedures, and it all started on a Saturday afternoon when I was mopping floors, and I almost fell, I slipped and fell, and it scared me. My heart went from from, what's normal, like 100 beats per minute. I'm looking at Callie like she knows. 100 beats per minute to 260 beats per minute. And they had to like shock me twice to get my heart to go back in rhythm. Like, boom, like you see on ER, which you guys don't know what that is because I'm old. And like, it changed my life. It messed me up mentally, and things that had never been a part of my life became an everyday, every moment part of my life. Things like anxiety and fear. Like I literally would go throughout life, and like if a car pulled out in front of me and it scared me, it's like, okay, this is the moment I'm going to die because my heart's going to explode. Like that's the stuff that went through my head. And for almost 2 full years, like stressed to the max, and like nobody would know that like I'm sitting somewhere nearly having a panic attack. One time early in the days, we're having a staff meeting at my house, and someone mentions prayer for someone who had a heart attack, and I'm having a full-blown silent panic attack, sweating to death in my recliner at my house because I'm scared that that's going to happen to me. And about a year ago, through the generosity of some people around us, like I started going to counseling. I go see Dr. Ellis over in Powdersville, Open Door Biblical Counseling Center. I go see him once a month, sometimes twice a month, and it has changed my life. Like taking that time out to be able to process what was going on in my head and in my body and learning about this physiological response to this emotional thing that was going on with me. Like I say all that to say, like I understand keenly over the last 12 months on the need for taking care of yourself. I'm a better husband. I'm a better father. I'm a better pastor. I'm a better person. I'm a better pastor because of that. However, we can't take it so far that we disengage from the world only to take care of ourselves. Jesus understood the value of retreat. He often retreated in his ministry. Over and over again, he withdrew from time to time, even from the people who were closest to him, to spend time with the Father. But that's the difference. When he would retreat, he would not retreat into himself. He would retreat into the Father. When he would care for himself, he would go to the Father, not to himself. He withdrew to be alone with the Father, but he also did not completely disengage from his community. He would go away for a little bit and get recharged, right? And then he would go back and keep on doing what God had created him to do. He also regularly retreated out of proactive mentality, not reactive. And that's where we really struggle. When things go wrong, it's overwhelming. I can't handle it. I've got to retreat. And that's not what's happening. That's called escape. But when we're proactive and we retreat to the Father, that's not escape. That's actually dealing with the things that are going on in our lives. It's kind of like my sister, the oldest sister I have, when she was in college, how she dealt with all her problems. Mom, don't tell her I said this. Was she would take a nap. And it's like, sis, I mean, that's cool, but when you wake up, what was still there? Your problems. They're still there. And you're just going to take another nap? Like, no, we have to deal with these things. And being proactive and not reactive makes a big difference. It's meant to help us prepare for difficulties ahead of us and not find relief from them on the backside. It's meant to keep us full, not refill us from empty. Go back and read the Gospels account of Jesus' time with the Father at the Garden of Gethsemane. And this is a great example. Jesus understood what he was getting ready to go through. It's not like he hung up on the cross and he was just lamenting before the Father. Like, Lord, I'm so poured out. I'm so overwhelmed. He's not up there just, Lord, where are you? Right? He said things, Lord, but he was already full when he walked into that season. He spent the night before praying to God, help get me ready. And for so many of us, we wait until we're completely depleted before we call out to God. You can't live a selfless life when you're empty all the time. And we can't look at it like, well, I can only get recharged when I get empty. It's funny, like when we come here on Sunday mornings, like you can pretty much tell what kind of week most people had by just the way they walk in. And I get it, life is crazy. But how do we stay full? Part of it is living selflessly. So let me ask you the question. Are you living selflessly? Who do you live your life? My bad. Some of you jumped hard. Did you jump, Callie? Yeah. Who do you live your life for? Do we need a test to assess where we are? Well, good, I'm going to give you one. When someone asks you for help, where does your mind go first? Are you looking for a way to say yes or a way to say no? If this for me is like when someone's moving. Like if I want to know if I'm living selflessly, when someone asks me to help them move, if I'm trying to concoct a way to say no, I know that I'm not living selflessly. This is not an easy topic for our heart to parse out. Our nature always drives us towards self. We have to condition ourselves to ask questions like, what choices do we have before us that bring the most honor to God? That's what holiness looks like. That's what the pursuit of holiness looks like. And sometimes, a lot of times, all the time, we have to allow people in our lives to speak to us, to speak into our lives, to reveal blind spots and hold us accountable. I need more people in my life that look at me and say, hey, Matt, you're living in a world right now that's somewhere between like self-centered and selfish. Like to me, there's a scale. There's self-centered, there's self-absorption in the middle, and there's just selfishness. I need people in my life to say, hey, Matt, like you are in there somewhere and it's not good. To help me reveal blind spots. The idea of holiness that we're going to talk about for the next 3 weeks after today, it seems really big, and I get it. I've had to really spend some time working on it. Look, I have two Bible degrees, and I'm still trying to work out what holiness looks like to me. And it is big because it should intersect every aspect of who we are. But learning how to pursue holiness is not terribly complicated. In fact, we've got 2 really good starting places today. Like, are we living selflessly? Are we looking at our lives and saying, like, I'm fully surrendered? Like, every part of who I am is for God's to have influence over or control over? Have I learned that when I feel like I need to get some clarity from the Lord, like I try to peer into the future and say, like, Lord, what are you doing? And I think when we start to like close the door on this part of the conversation, I think it's really important for us to kind of peer into the future and say, like, what if? I love what if questions. And the what if question that I've really been mulling over these last couple of weeks is preparing to have these moments with you is like, well, what if, like, just us, like just our little church that meets in this little corner of downtown? Like, what if we committed together? Like, and we actually did it, not just committed, but it actually followed through with the commitment to say, like, we're going to pursue holiness as a community, as a family, and as individuals. That we're going to do our best to live a fully surrendered life, that every part of who we are is God's, not ours. And what if we actually live selflessly? Not this fake selflessness, right? That people can see that makes us feel good and make people think good things about us. Like we were actually selfless. So like when you asked me to help you move, I said yes because I wanted to honor God, not out of some obligation of friendship. What could God do in this community if we allowed him to have influence over everything we were doing and we were selfless? We could see lives transformed. We'd see people accepting Christ, finding freedom, marriage restored, addictions broken. You know how amazing that would be in this neighborhood? It's not a matter of if those things could happen. I believe those things and much more will happen. Absolutely, 100%. It's a certainty. And over the next few weeks, as we dive deeper into what being set apart means, will you join me? Right? This is just me. Will you join me in a commitment to pursuing holiness? Let's pray. Lord, I thank you so much for the time that we have together. And I'm so thankful for your word and how it calls us to be holy, even though sometimes I struggle on what that looks like. I'm still learning about this really fundamental principle of what it means to have a relationship with you. So Lord, I'm thankful that you've given some clarity to me, that I have a better understanding that pursuing holiness means living a fully surrendered life and living selflessly. And that could make an incredible difference. An incredible difference, not only in my life and our relationship, but my home, my work environments, when I'm interacting with people in the community, our church. And I believe this community, this little corner of Greenville, could be changed by a group of people who said, you know what? I'm going to do my best to pursue holiness. So Lord, help us, give us opportunity, convict our heart where it needs to be convicted, bring people around us to hold us accountable, to show us the way. And Lord, we're going to return that back to you as praise, because we know it's going to be honoring to you. And that's ultimately what holiness is. We love you. In your name we pray. Amen.
We appreciate you being with us here today. I hope that you found this message encouraging and challenging. And I just remind you that you can always join us in person. We would love to meet with you face to face. I hope you have a great week, and we'll see you again soon.